Look at this, ladies and gentlemen, it's a lovely, solid gold lady's watch. But all is not well. It is running 20 minutes a day, fast and with very low amplitude. Can we save it? Of course we can. Let's go. I've not managed to decipher the hallmark yet, but Rolex left us other clues. Rolex marked their cases with the claimed 7 world records between 1923 and 1926, after which they claimed even more. So we know this watch was made within those 3 years. What the actual world records Rolex claimed to have broken were, has been lost to time like tears in the rain. But we do know that by 1941 Rolex were claiming an astounding 34 world record. But here we have our first bona fide issue. The setting lever spring, this part here, is broken. It should have an arm meeting the setting lever. Luckily, the yoke and the setting lever are actually doing the job of switching between winding and hand setting well enough. Before getting too involved, we shall get our housekeeping done first. Remove the power from the mainspring and get the balance wheel to a place of safety. Although the amplitude is low, not seeing any show-stopping issues here, we can continue to maintain high hopes for this timepiece. We don't normally show this, but it's one of the most important parts of watchmaking. The screwdriver blade needs to be dressed to fit the slot correctly. If you're starting out in watchmaking, this is the one simple thing you can do to make your work more successful. Now we'll square off the tip while getting the blade to the correct thickness and finally a little polish on some 1500 grit paper. That is more like it. The blade fits well, while the tip isn't touching the bottom of the slot. We shall remove the pallet fork too. We remove the pallet fork now, just in case there's some residual power left in the mainspring. And there it is. Probably not enough to cause damage if we just removed the barrel bridge, but better safe than sorry. And let's completely undo the setting lever screw while we are here too. Right then, over to the keyless and motion works. Why do we always remove the keyless and motion works first, you ask? Good question. The main reason is so the center wheel is still fully supported by the movement when we pull off the cannon pinion. There may be other reasons, but I can't remember what they are. The broken setting lever spring first. The broken spring does remove some of the positive feedback when switching between winding and hand setting, but the watch is still perfectly usable. In fact, early keyless works often didn't have a setting lever spring, just using the yoke setting lever and yoke spring to provide this function, taking the winding pinion out a little earlier in the proceedings than usual. This will release some of the tension on the yoke spring. Minute wheel is next. Dropped it. I'll sort that out in the edit later. We'll use the watchmaker's special stick enhanced with some Rodico to pick up the intermediate wheel. Did you hear that squeak? That's the tip of the screwdriver slipping on the bottom of the slot. Let's blunt off the screwdriver a little. And I'll want to clean up in the edit. That's the yoke gone. Finally, we can remove the cannon pinion. And finally, we'll remove the balance cap jewel. The cap jewel and its screw goes into some special cleaner for attention later. Let's start on this side with the Rolex signed ratchet wheel. I don't know if you spotted all of these, but Rolex put their name on the dial, the back of the dial, the watch case, the crown wheel, and the reverse side of the main plate. This level of branding on watches wasn't as common 100 years ago as it is now. Many top-notch famous brands didn't even bother to put their names on dials. But right from the early days of the company, Rolex took their branding and the stories and legends they could apply to that brand as seriously as their watchmaking. And no Rolex legend is more legendary than the successful first confirmed ascent of Everest. Did Rolex reach the summit? No, the answer is no. But their watches were used on the trip to the hill. That was, and still is, good enough for the marketing team. Right then, where are we with the disassembly? These diminutive screws secure the crown wheel in its location. It's easy to see how this watch has survived 100 years. Every part is machined and hand polished. I wonder what the makers of this watch would think of watches designed to last 5 years, and worse than that, the concept of no longer supported. I suspect they consider it an absolute boondoggle, and rightly so. 3 screws for the barrel bridge. As ever, when working on a movement type for the first time, we compare the screws and note any differences. And yes, we have a slightly shorter one here. Straight onto the train of wheels bridge, same procedure. Inspect the screws before migrating them to the parts tray. Shall we take a little look at what was going on in the world in 1923? I vote yes. It was the year that the Hollywood sign made its first appearance. In its first incarnation, it was Hollywoodland. It was also the year that German hyperinflation really took hold, setting off a chain of events that ended very badly. The year that the self-winding wristwatch was invented by English watchmaker John Harwood. In the 1950s, the Rolex marketing team claimed the achievement for themselves. It took Harwood suing the company and a court-mandated apology for Rolex to admit the truth in a series of newspaper adverts. And of course, we all know who invented television. That's right, Vladimir Kozma-Zorikin in 1923. But more importantly, it took the human race, in all its ingenuity and unstoppable march of progress, until 1923 to put some frozen water ice on a stick. Frank Epperson patented his invention. That became known by the brand name Popsicle. It truly was a golden era. This mainspring is clearly not the right one for the watch. There's too much free space in the barrel. We shall replace this one. We'll unwind the spring to remove it. Carefully grab the middle to start the process, and then I'll clean that up in the edit. This secret spring removal method is only for use by watchmaking gods and shouldn't be attempted by normal people. Let's quickly move on to the pre-clean and parts inspection. We don't normally show much of this, but let's take a look at some of the process. It's important for the movement parts to be pretty clean before they get near the cleaning machine. The removal of residues and debris helps the overall process. And while we're cleaning, we're inspecting. Every pinion leaf, every gear tooth, every pivot and jewel. This tooth on the second wheel is showing some damage. We're on the lookout for burrs or deformation that looks like it might hang up on the corresponding pinion leaf. In this case, it doesn't look too bad. The pivot could do with a polish. As we move down the gear train from the second wheel, the speed of the wheel movement increases and the torque decreases. The condition of the working surfaces becomes ever more important. On the escape wheel, we check every tooth flat is equally polished. And we'll get stuck into the balance wheel assembly to gain access to the cap jewels and pivots. In watches of this age, these tiny screws are often mangled. It's a pleasure to see these in such good condition. The screws can go into the cleaner with the parts to keep them all together. Now it's pivot polish time. There's a number of ways to do this. Today we'll use pin polishing sticks. The pithwood makes a great platform to support the wheels with little risk of damage. All the wheels go through the polishing process. It's very important to remove all traces of the pin polishing rubber before the parts go into the cleaning machine. While the parts are whizzing around in the cleaning solution, we shall measure the mainspring and order a replacement. These measurements are just for reference. This spring is too short and weak for this watch. We'll have to take an educated guess on the replacement. 9/100ths of a millimeter thick and 1 millimeter high. The other key measurement is the barrel diameter, which is 7 millimeters. At last, everything is squeaky clean and then polished. We can start getting this centenarian back together. The lower cap jewel for the balance pivot leads the way. A drop of oil can be put on this before refitting this part, but in this case we shall use the auto oiler to inject a drop of oil onto the cap jewel after fitting. For the top jewel, trying to keep the oil drop in place while assembling is extremely challenging. Using an auto oiler or drawing oil through the jewel with a sharpened oiler is the way to go. You may have noticed parts stamped with the last digits of the watch's serial number. That was quite common when this watch was made. Look at the condition of that screwdriver blade. I wouldn't be surprised if I get a knock on the door from the horology police, and rightly so. And we'll get the new mainspring into the barrel. It's all about the outermost coil. Get that in and the rest will follow. That was close. We nearly had another rogue escape mainspring situation. Perfect amount of movement on the barrel arbor. We shall proceed. That's all the pre-assembly job's done. Let's get the movement back together. Bar in first. I do hope we guessed right with the mainspring strength. A little bit under strength is better than too much, so I was quite conservative. Escape wheel in first. Then the rest of the wheels in reverse order. Fourth, third and second. The train of wheels bridge drops on now. On older movements, it takes a little force to push the bridge into position. This makes the operation a little more tricky. And that trick is to let the task take as long as it needs. Don't try to achieve anything. Just work the process and allow the correctly positioned pivots and bridge to emerge from the task. That approach is true for all of watchmaking. Focusing on the detail of each individual task in the moment rather than what one is trying to achieve in the future is the path to success. What else was happening the year this watch was made, I hear you ask? 1923 was the year of the first transatlantic radio broadcast. It was also the year a certain small, angry Austrian tried to overthrow a democratically elected government. What an absolute rotter. But the United States of America had bigger issues than German politics to worry about. In April 1923, the city of New York faced a raccoon invasion. Citizens reported an unexpected increase in raccoon sightings in residential neighborhoods. Fearing a raccoon plague, the city debated ways to handle the furry influx, with citizens forming raccoon patrols and placing traps. In May 1923, London tried to beat New York's raccoon invasion when a shipment of monkeys meant for London Zoo escaped from their crates at a train station. The monkeys scattered, creating chaos as they climbed buildings, tried to steal food from vendors and hid in shops. Reporters insisted that 3 of the monkeys tried to get away by riding bikes out of the city. Right, that's enough furry invasion stories. How are we doing with the reassembly? The barrel bridge is back in place and we're nearly completely sure we put the short screw back in the correct position. Some blue grease for the crown wheel. And a little more for the inner edge of the crown wheel. This click spring is housed in a recess machined into the main plate. Good work, Rolex. In modern watches, even those costing 10,000 or more, the click might be a stamped metal fragment or a shard of spring steel. Look at this machined and polished beauty. I think I may have been born too late. And even the click screw has a chamfered polished surface added by the designer, adding architectural interest. We'll move on to a glorious ratchet wheel and screw machined, added graining, polished surfaces signed with inlaid gold. We shall plop the pallet fork into place now. All the pivots in a watch are delicate, but the pallet fork pivots are particularly sensitive. These pivots are unique because they are only ones that remain unlubricated. The watchmaker's special stick is deployed to keep the bridge in place. And now we shall put some life back into the watch and lubricate the pallet jewels. Some people lubricate the pallet jewels by putting a great big daub of oil on the jewels before fitting the pallet fork. This is known as doing it wrong. Stay calm. If we twitch and put a splodge of oil on the escape wheel, we'll have to disassemble the watch to remove the wheel and clean it. The balance wheel is rehoused and we get our first chance at seeing how we've done. Kicked right back into life, looking good too. Got to pass on thanks to all the previous generations of watchmakers who've looked after this watch. Now is the time to remember, stay in the moment and the details of what's happening. It's so easy to rush and break the balance pivot. Just enough oil to get drawn through to lubricate the pivots. Better not enough than too much. With that done, we can start with the keyless and motion works. Setting lever goes back onto its screw. The balance was removed before we did this. It is so easy to squeeze the wrong part of the movement and break the balance pivot. All that we ask of you is do not inquire how we know this. Cannon pinion is pushed into place. Minute wheel relocation next and some blue grease on the main plate to minimize wear from the winding pinion. Sliding pinion is plonked in and more blue grease. Intermediate wheel needs to be back and we can proceed to the yoke. It's one of these screws, must be the smaller one. The larger one is for the yoke spring. The setting lever spring is affixed with its two screws, after which we can return the winding stem and check operation of the keyless work. With reassembly complete, we shall let the watch run for 24 hours before assessing its performance. Good morning. Today is now tomorrow. How did we do? There's a lot to like here. Straight line, reasonable amplitude, but that beat error needs addressing. We've removed the pallet fork so we can see how well the impulse dual aligns with the banking pins. It should be in the center, but is clearly to the left. With watches, where spare parts are not obtainable, we always disassemble the balance assembly for this adjustment. That's much better. After running for 12 hours from full wind, we can get a good idea of the performance. That's looking good for a 100-year-old watch. Very good indeed. If you have a watch that needs some love and attention, check out the link in the video description. And please remember, have an absolutely marvelous day in all departments.